Hello and welcome back to my channel. It's Fatmata here from Traditionally Inspired Meaningful Art. Same intro outfit, guys. Okay, we are here to talk about the heirloom quilt that I made for my best friend. So if you have not already watched the previous vlog where I spoke about making a baby heirloom quilt, please do. I will link it up in the cards. But in today's video, while it is a quilt, this is super special because I actually designed the quilt pattern myself. It is my second ever quilt, and I knew that I was working with really finite pieces of fabric because I was using button-up shirts from my friend's father who had passed away. So I wanted to make the most use of all of the pieces that I had cut out, and I had two quilts to make, a baby quilt and also a lap quilt. So some of the remnants from the baby quilts were transferred over here so that I could make use of them within the color palette. So I decided that I was going to make my own quilt that was inspired by another quilt, which I will also link down below. I got into this rabbit hole of watching tons of YouTube videos, listening to podcasts about quilting, because that's what you do when you dig into a new hobby. And while sewing garments and quilting might use a similar machine, there are quite a few differences, and I learned a bunch. I also learned some amazing techniques that allowed me to do the quilts relatively quickly. I did not do quilts in a day, but I did do them in quite a confined turnaround time in about 2 weeks. I mean, from start to piecing to putting it together to batting it and actually quilting it. So I'm really proud of myself, in addition to the other projects that I was doing during that time. And I wanted to share with you in this video, not just the making of the quilt for my best friend, but also some of the tips that really helped me to do this efficiently. So throughout the video, I'll probably have some voiceovers that really detail some of the things that helped me. And as much as I can, I'll try to link videos down below for you in the description as to where I got those ideas from and how I learned some of these awesome techniques that I definitely would incorporate if I were going to make another quilt. Now, this project is by far one of the most sentimental things I think I've ever made. It's probably one of my top 5 projects of 2021, simply because of how gratifying it was to do something for someone else, but also someone so deserving, for my best friend. So I was thrilled at her reaction. I managed to keep it a surprise. She knew that I was making a blanket for her sister, but I was very low-key about the fact that she would also be receiving one. So if you stay tuned until the end, you'll see her reveal video where I actually shared it with her. It was kind of short because as soon as she started crying, well, I started, I couldn't keep it up. So, but it was just so sweet, and what a remarkable man, and what an amazing gift that I could use my talents in this way to honor him and to give his daughters something to remember him by. So it was just all around such great feelings. So this video was recorded over the time of me creating the quilt. I hope you enjoy the montage. I didn't tell my best friend this, but I do want to make her a quilt as well, like a lap quilt. And her house is mostly blues, deep navies, and like yellow and whites and gold and things like that. So I do want to preserve as much of the deep navy and this blue checkered sort of gingham one as possible, and the creams and the whites for hers, and then sort of double down on the pink, the mixed blue and pink one, and of course you know, the other khaki and white and such for the baby blanket, because I could, you know, make use of that. So I'll be judicious I think tonight I'm gonna go ahead and start cutting them, like cutting out the collars and the yoke and the arms so I can start laying out the fabric and really see what I have to work with. Most of these are extra larges, so I'm hoping that I get a lot of fabric to play with so that it would be enough for the baby blanket and also a lap blanket, and see what is left over, or if I need to actually add more fabric. So we'll see how that goes, and I'll take you along for the ride. If you plan to design your own quilt like I did, I cannot stress enough how important proper prior planning will be in this process. First of all, for the design, keep it simple. Basic blocks and basic shapes are going to be your best friend. I loved squares, rectangles, and half square triangles. I would also say use graphing paper. It was such a saving grace, and I could actually make my design to scale. Each of the squares on the graphing paper for me equated to 2 inches by 2 inches in real life. I also would emphasize that you keep one of the dimensions for your block pieces the same throughout. That's really going to be helpful when you want to align and get all of your rows together. Also, make sure that you remind yourself that in quilting, 1/4 inch seams are the golden rule. So, if you are making your final design on graphing paper, make sure that when you're actually ready to cut out your materials, that you are adding 1/2 inches to each of your dimensions, because once you actually stitch them at 1/4 inch seams, you're going to be eating up 1/2 inch. All right, hopefully that helps. So let's talk fabric selection and also prep. Now, if you're going to be using old garments like I am, or pre-loved items, make sure that you're checking the fabric composition. I wanted to ensure that all of my fabrics were all the same, 100% cotton. There were tons of great poly cotton blends, but because you're going to be washing and stitching these things together, you don't want one fabric to shrink and the other one stay put. So I made sure that I had all 100% cotton fabrics. From there, you might want to pre-wash everything. Again, get any of that shrinkage out of the way. I pressed all of mine before working with them and before cutting so that I could get the best cuts that I possibly could. Also, to get the most of your fabric, you might want to remove the button plackets, collars, cuffs, cut open the sleeves, and while you're at it, you might as well salvage those buttons. Let's talk cutting. This is a job for a rotary cutter and your mat and an acrylic ruler with a grid on it, if possible. It makes light work of a big job. You want to see how much fabric you can actually get out of your shirts, so lay them out to see what you can do. I tried to get as far, as deep as I could into the fabric before hitting an armhole, and went for as long as I could before hitting the shirt tail. From there, I cut straight lines and then saved any of the excess. Be mindful that side seams can cause some warping to the fabric, and you want to make sure that you're getting those grains as straight as possible. Save the offcuts, of course, because you might use them for smaller piecing or for future projects. Focus on those straight lines at the beginning. I was inspired by the French twist quilt pattern by Doug Lecco after seeing it on Jordan Fabrics channel. So I also created a quilt using 3 sizes of rectangles, small, medium, and large. And with that, I was able to create 3 different block templates that I used throughout. And while I fell in love with making half square triangles, so I threw in a couple of those too. The best and most revolutionary piece of advice that I got to do this quilt efficiently came from Tiffany's Quilting Life, and I'm going to link that video down below. But she pre-stacked her fabrics in the order that they needed to be sewn in and did chain stitches. Now, I had to adapt that based on my particular needs, but what I did was sit down with my guide, and with the color-coded guide that I had, I went ahead and stacked row by row every single piece in order. I worked from right to left so that in the end, the first piece on the top of my stack was actually the first piece within that row. So I worked backwards so that as they were stacked, they would allow me to move forward. Once you've done your awesome job of stacking, keep your guide close by, whatever that is, whatever the pattern is. From there, I put together my initial row using my half square triangle and whatever that first piece was. Putting them right sides together, I ran it under my machine with a 1/4 inch seam and moved on to row 2 and row 3 and so on and so forth. When I got to the end of the row, I put on a small piece of fabric just as a stopper, and I would bring the entire piece back to the top and begin at row 1 and pick up the very next piece. Now, because I was working with rectangles of varied sizes, it did become a little bit tricky, but the nice thing was that I was just concerned with the 1/4 inch seam. So I would make sure I was on the right row number, pick up my piece from that stack, and sandwich it together with the previous fabric and run it under my machine at a 1/4 inch seam. This quilt grew and grew and grew so fast, and it was amazing, but that prior prep work was essential to make this happen. I kind of like assembly line processes where I can use them, so chain piecing and chain stitching was absolutely satisfying for me. After piecing, we can even iron or press in batches. So I brought the entire 5 rows of piecing over and went row by row and pressed the seams flat, alternating the sides so that they can lay beautifully. So I've done a big thing. I've sewn together all of the pieces, and I've gone ahead. What I was doing was numbering them by their rows, just so I don't get them out of order, because the order for me, at least in the quilt I'm doing, is quite important. Something to note about the pattern that I created: I did go ahead and get rid of the inner 3 rows after looking at it. It was really breaking up sort of that gradient in the colors that I wanted, and in order to really see it, you got to squint your eye a little bit and you can kind of see the darker sort of diagonal going. But having it broken up with the half square triangles in the center the way that I had it previously just wasn't working, so I just folded that up and taped it shut. So any hoosers, I'm gonna go ahead and sew the rows together so I at least have that central entire like quilt panel. Then once I kind of see it together, I'll make my decision on how I want the half square triangles to be. I have quite a few of them left. They're all back there and in different prints and combinations, so I want to kind of see it with the full inner part done so I can determine how I want to lay out the half square triangles, what sort of design I want it to make. I'm learning so much in this process. All right, let's piece this together. I'm really embarrassed to tell you what time in the morning it is, but what I'll say is this: I've done 5 of the rows. Some of them are wonky. Some lines are not matching up. And I think that's sign enough for me to know that it's time to stop. You see it? See the dark coming into the light? Do you see it? I hope that she likes this design, but I'm really happy with what I've been able to get done. And I can't say enough about how proper prior planning really does pay off. It's really good. Wow, I look exhausted. Ugh. It's a fresh morning, so it's about 10 a.m., going to 10 a.m., and I am in the sewing room here to fix all the mistakes that 2 a.m. Fatmata made. And I think there are a couple, so we're gonna go ahead and get back to the quilt. I'm really excited to just be refreshed and like revisiting this, and I'm really happy that I stopped when I did so I didn't make more mistakes. We don't need that. But particularly, I know that this border right here needs some help. I'm gonna flip you around so you can see what I mean. All right, so here is the, it doesn't look so bad on camera, but you could see here how there's quite a gap in between. Now, I had two minds about this. I could either do like a sashing, which I think would actually be nice just to really distinguish the border from the inner, I'm sorry, the chair is squeaking, the inner quilting. So I might do like a bias binding. I don't know if that's what people usually do, but that's what I would do. Now, on this side, you can see that these match up a lot better. And I don't know if that has to do with the fact that I was ending on this end. So I don't know if like throughout, if I was off by like even a millimeter, and then by the time it gets to the end, that adds up and then it shifted a little bit. But this is the end that I start piecing them together on. There is a bit more of a gap at this very top one right here. Anyways, of course, when you're up close to the quilt and working on it, you notice all of these tiny things that the recipient probably will never notice, but I might just move on ahead, add the other 5 panels, and then come back to it once all 10 are sewn together and see how much I dislike this, or if I can cover it up or plan to cover it up, then there's no need to like unpick it. Wish me luck. When piecing together the rows or the larger sections of your quilt, if you have the opportunity to attach a longer arm to your sewing machine, or like I'm doing here, using a table and butt it up against your surface, just to make sure that the weight of the actual quilt top isn't weighing you down. So that was so helpful for me that I had extra room to move and guide the quilt top through my machine. I feel much better that I took the time to unpick and get my sort of striping detail correct. I'm going to be adding, like I said, another layer to the edge of this, and then also we'll add a border of the half square triangles to the top and bottom. I did not do this for all of the seams in my quilt, but if you can alternate the direction of your stitching of your seam allowance by row, please do that. I'm going to be using this Quilter's fusible batting, which is 45 by 60. I really want to get the length up to 60 because I want it to be like something that you could throw on and actually cuddle up in. And I'm using the fusible to make this faster for me, this process of basting them all together. Now, I thrifted this actually. I remember seeing it at the thrift store and I was like, one day I might need that. I actually thrifted both of these. I have a high loft batting and then another low loft, but I'm gonna use this one. It is low loft. I wish it was more medium loft, but such is life. So we have the quilt top. I was trying to decide on what backing to use. And this is a quilter's cotton that I had thrifted a little while ago. I think I have about 2 yards of it. And I really can't imagine myself using this for anything else. I think when I first saw it, it reminded me of, I don't know what, but I thought I would use it, and I don't think I would as much. But look at how well the colors and the tones go together. So that's what I'm leaning towards, but I had also pulled out this sand washed linen that I recently picked up at G Street Fabric, but I think I'm gonna reserve that for like pants in the summer. And then I have this just navy, I think it's like some sort of poly. It has loops in the back, but it's not French terry. It's super soft and smooth. And because I was using a low loft batting, I was thinking about using that to give it more sponginess. But because of how stretchy it is and like mixing the two, like a polyester and all this cotton, I didn't know if they would wash well together. So I think I'm going to unfortunately just leave that and then go with these two. So to add the additional length that I want on either end, I think I'm going to do the self-facing binding and use the backing as the binding, and then just like overlap it over the batting by like 4 inches on either end of it. I will show you what I mean. It may be worthwhile to roll up the quilt and sit it in your lap, removing and pushing aside all the pieces of the quilt you're not currently working on, so that you can get to the seams you need. While I use the self-facing backing as the binding for the top and bottom edges, I did use store-bought binding for the long edges on the side and used a decorative stitch to finish it off. All right, so this is the final quilt here. This is the one I made for my best friend. Really excited about it. The top is also bordered in that same way. I just have it flipped up over my mirror so you guys can see it. But I just took it out of the washer machine and dryer, so you see all of the looks quilted actually, which is really nice. I have the quilts about 4 to 4.5 inches apart, and I think that's the widest I was allowed to go for this, so hopefully that will work out well. And yeah, I was able to use a really nice decorative stitch on my machine finally, and that's how I put the bias binding on, because stitching in the ditch was not going to work. So I went ahead and used something like that to make it more intentional. Also did that across the top to stitch those parts together, and I just quilted it by doing a stitch in the ditch along the various rows. Some are better hidden than others, right? But all in all, I'm really happy with how it turned out. So I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this up, get it ready for them tomorrow. So I'm gonna share with you the reveal video. If I were you, I would get some tissues because it is really sentimental. It made me cry. You might not know them, so maybe you won't cry, but you might cry. So if you want, you can pause it right now and get some tissue if you'd like. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. You going too? You thought I forgot about you? No. You going too?
What is this? People make stuff for you. Oh my goodness.
You going too, Weenie?
Okay, baby.
You have to open it.
You want me to open it there? She was just telling me about it.
Yeah. You're welcome to go with your... Didn't put any picks in there. Said it wouldn't fit in all of your stuff.
You are so good.
You too.
You are so good.
You're welcome.
I remember the shirt.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm so happy you like it. And if you've ever thought of making an heirloom quilt for someone that you love, from of fabrics or materials or clothing from a loved one who has passed on, I would say 100% go for it. Not only is it making good use of those fabrics and things like that and that material, so that it doesn't go to waste, but how wonderful to then take that into something that they could actually use, sit with, and just feel that comfort and that coziness with that person that was so meaningful to them. So definitely consider it and go for it. It doesn't have to be super challenging. The quilt pattern that I created was squares and rectangles and a couple of half square triangles because I'm extra, but in the end I think it turned out really beautiful. And what really lets me know that it was worthwhile is my best friend's reaction, and it was priceless. So I hope you stick around, subscribe. There's lots of really cool DIYs and creative things happening here. Until next time, stay creative. Bye-bye.